Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
I'm Ryan Honeyman, a partner at Lift Economy. My guest today is my brother, Spencer Honeyman. Spencer is an executive coach, group facilitator, and consultant working at the confluence of elite performance, innovation, and healing. He is a graduate of Pomona College's Interdisciplinary Environmental Analysis program and is a certified integral facilitator. Spencer has taught workshops on communication and group dynamics from MIT to Marrakesh. He has trained in depth with master facilitators Thomas Huebel and Diane Hamilton in the subjects of human development, group dynamics, and improvisation before launching Enliven. He has over a decade of practice in shadow yoga and Tibetan meditation practice and is trained in the art of circle singing in the lineage of Bobby McFerrin through Dave Worm. Spencer, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, man. Good to see you.
Spencer's down the hall from me as we're recording this, so it's kind of funny. Spencer, the first question we typically ask is, how did you first get interested in the work you're doing today?
I started off studying environmental studies in school. I think like a lot of people, you start to learn about and see everything that's wrong with the current sort of system, you know? We were studying agriculture, we were studying climate, we were studying politics, all through sort of an environmental lens. I think at some point, I just had this question of like, well, why isn't any of this being implemented out in the world? We'd go down to the permaculture farm and be doing crop rotations, and we'd be studying new forms of politics and democracy using the internet. And it was sort of like, why isn't this hitting the ground? And I think I started to just get really interested and understand that a lot of it, at least from my own perspective, my own interest is around the limitations people have around just entering collaboration, our own human relationships where we bump up against each other and get triggered, even if we're on a super innovative team working on alternative energy solutions or whatever. We're at the end of the day, we're still people. We get stressed out. We have limiting beliefs. We don't see the whole picture clearly. We don't quite know how to give honest feedback, or it's overwhelming to receive feedback, and teams break down. So I started to just see that was really my passion. There was sort of a realm of, oh, I can work with people, you know, with individuals and with teams. That's a little bit. I mean, I think just even before college, just to kind of back up, I think I've just always been naturally interested in people. You know, I think in the school system, we get really trained to be specific in content, to be creating work, creating reports, creating memorization. And it's really rare that we slow down and learn how to collaborate with each other on group projects, that, you know, an instructor would stop you and say, hey, it looks like y'all are having a hard time getting to the next step here. Let's just like slow down and look at your decision making as a group, kind of what's going on. And instead it's focused on this final result of the report or the project or whatever. So I think I was just, I really missed that. You know, I got some of it through sports. Like you and I both played soccer. So we had that sort of, you know, you have to be attuned to other people on the field. You have to be in sync with each other. It's like as soon as you get emotional with one another, that's when it breaks down. So I think we got, you know, I both got some of that through the sports world, but in the school context or work context, I didn't really have that. I didn't really see that. So I had to go after and find these people. Yeah, my two mentors, Thomas and Diane, who were real masters. And I caught the wind of what they were doing and said, oh, this is missing. I really want to become skillful at this.
You know, you mentioned Thomas Huebel. Can you give folks a sense of who he is and what he does? Because I think this practice of, you've told me stories about how he will be facilitating something and he's actually not listening to the words so much as like the subtle energy below the words. the body sensation. Can you tell me like who he is and some of his work and like why you got interested in that?
Yeah. So Thomas is from Austria. He's an Austrian spiritual teacher. And the way he's spoken about it is like, all right, if we're not going to live in a monastery or a nunnery and like spend 100% of our time developing our mind and ourself, like if we're in the world, we need to bring a kind of discipline and focus to the way that we communicate. Communication is happening every day with our partners, with our kids, with our teammates, with our clients, all of that. So how can we bring as much focus and discipline to the world of communication? So he runs sort of large scale workshops from 100 people to a couple hundred people, and will basically create a practice space where you're working with, as you mentioned, sort of things that are beyond just the rational, right? Like a lot of time we sit down, even in this meeting, right, and can have just the content or just agenda or the kind of structure of the meeting, but there's so much happening in each of us. There's a whole world inside of you. There's a whole world inside of me. We can start to be attuned to that. And a lot of it's maybe an easy way in is like through body language, how so much communication happens through our mannerisms, through our body, through our voice. And Thomas will take it a step further into the realm of including imagery that's arising inside of you, including emotions that are rising inside of you. And this is something that I learned from him that I use every day in mediating conflicts or working with a client or working with a group, which is that we are so porous as humans. We often think we're just a totally separate being. It kind of ends at our skin layer. But, you can kind of pick up on this, like when you walk into a room and it just has a good feel, like you walk into a gathering of people. We haven't done that in a while, so maybe we're not as practiced at it, but you walk into a room and you kind of like, you feel people out, right? You sort of like, oh, it has a good vibe in here. Like, oh, this is cool. This is cool. I like how people are connecting. Or you walk into another room and maybe there's just been an argument or it feels tense. And it's literally like the space itself sort of feels thicker, feels more rigid. And my body, our bodies, read this kind of information naturally. Sort of how an animal would read a space. Like, is it safe to approach this person? Or like, oh, should I be given some space right here? So we have this deep hardwired system that we're operating on of being attuned to the life world, to plants and animals and each other in a really subtle somatic way. And we often write that information off. I did for a long time. It wasn't, where would you use that? And just creating my biology report or whatever. Maybe on the soccer field. Again, maybe in these places of music, in dance, in arts, in sports. Those places, you do train those. In theater, right? You have to be super attuned to people. But Thomas will take it, he'll work with these big group spaces. We will, as a whole group, 100 people drop into that. A sense of like presence, subtle attunement to one another. We'll break off into triads, into dyads, and you're practicing these kind of things. Like, just an example exercise would be, okay, find a partner, sit down with them. Maybe you've never met them. And okay, now you've never met this person. Describe the world as it appears through their eyes. It's like, whoa, how am I going to do that? But you kind of get out of your own way and you realize how much information we're picking up about the other person. How much we can, as soon as you start speaking, I've done exercises of these and the other person starts crying. Or someone does it to me. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't, how are you seeing all of that, right? And it's so he's really challenging this idea that we're totally separate entities, that in order to create conscious cultures and meaningful teams requires including all of this information that he refers to as subtle competency. Like, how can we train the skills of resting into those skill sets, learning how to sense another person emotionally, just without even talking to them. You walk into your room, your partner's there, your kids are there. I could ask how they're doing, which is I do, right? And we can also just attune to them. How are you doing? Right? Which is it. And if I'm not attuned to that, my intervention or questions to them might not land. And then he goes on to go much deeper, right? So he works with trauma. He works with once you start dropping in with a big group of people and get slow down and get still, things come up, right? The things that we've repressed start to come up. So he works between Israel and Germany around Holocaust, collective trauma. He's starting to work in the US around slavery, genocide trauma. It's deep stuff and requires a kind of willingness on the part of the participants to go in and be willing to feel the areas that we've numbed out and the energy behind that wants to be released.
Yeah, it strikes me that there's a few components that are necessary. Is one, training as a facilitator and having the confidence to bring the group that you're facilitating or with to that place. The second part of this is there's not many cultural containers for okay, what's coming up in the room right now? Mm-hmm. People are like, what are you doing?
Right.
That's weird.
Right. That's weird. Yeah.
Yeah. And so can you talk a little bit about how have you navigated that space when it's sort of not seen quite yet in many people as being like something you would do normally or something?
Right. One, it depends on the intention of the group space, right? Like if I'm just coming in as a mediator to a co-founder situation and they're having trouble with their financial split and feeling respected as individuals, some of that is going to just be straight up mediation. Like, we need to work this out. This isn't a container specifically to go into like the collective trauma and like, let's really bring all of that up. Although there might be a moment, I'm thinking of a recent situation where there was a man and a woman and they were in a negotiation. And there was a moment where we did have to speak to gender dynamics in the space. We had to presence that. So I'd say these things kind of just emerge naturally. Like when we got to how are we being valued with money in this situation, that came up. That was in the background. It was like, oh, historically, women haven't been valued in these positions. Like, we need to honor this. And if we had pushed that away, it would almost make the negotiation less effective because there's something that wanted to be there. But I would say that was a more intimate space. Like, we had created a container in which that could arrive. Maybe I'm going off track a bit. Your question was, what's involved in creating that container?
I was just interested in the work that Thomas and you have been doing is critically important. And there's just not a lot of common understanding or support for that type of work yet, even how important it is.
Right. I agree. You're right. It's kind of like we've had spaces to work on individual trauma, whether it's music or dance or somatic experiencing or these kind of things. But on the collective level, it's true. It's kind of being created. And I would agree. It's like I'm sort of still in the process of finding what is the most effective. When is it appropriate to, because I work as a facilitator, it's not always specifically oriented around, we are here to digest collective trauma, but it's probably the single biggest thing that gets in the way. You're saying it's not that well known. So I think it's sort of the phrase of, maybe I'm misquoting it, but people know what they want. They don't know what they need. Or they'll approach a consultant or a coach with what they want, not actually what they need. So they might say, our team's having infighting, or we need like better team building. And then some of the things under the surface is like, there are fields of collective trauma that need integration. This would, to get to where you're talking about, requires a level of willingness to enter into some of the ways that we feel disconnected from one another. And those can have historical roots. I'm definitely still honing like when it's appropriate to bring those in. And sometimes you can bring it in and a group's not ready. They weren't ready to go there. So we have to backtrack or go to somewhere more where they were expecting to go. But I'd say, Thomas's work, and for anybody who's like interested in that work, there are containers to set which with very specific agreements and very specific intention in which you can go into that. But they do require like a strong container and an acknowledgement of the kind of energies that you're working with.
One of the projects that I know you're excited about is the Enliven Academy. And I'm wondering if you could tell folks more about that and what you're up to.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for asking about that. I really love this project. I've been working over the years with training groups of people. So entering into some of these spaces where we as a group are practicing leadership skills, facilitation skills, conflict resolution skills, touching on collective issues. Trauma will come up, but it's creating a cohort environment that's partly done outdoors in nature, in the wilderness. Currently, it's in and around the Bay Area. And then it's partly on Zoom, so online. And it's really meant for, this kind of gap that I feel like I'm sort of creating the environment that I would have wanted as a 20-something, which is, there's a different kind of education that's needed. You maybe didn't get that in school. You maybe see that the answer to a lot of the questions and issues that we're facing right now are collective rather than individual. So it's not so much like the lone wolf hero or heroine with the current problems that we're facing. You have this sense of like, wow, we need to learn how to operate in collectives or lead collectives or be in collectives. And then you want to be in a like cohort. You want to be with peers. You want to be practicing with other people around these skill sets. So it's designed for purpose-driven entrepreneurs, change makers, maybe folks who are currently working in another trade and really want to transition into this place of knowing how to work with people. So what are like the people skills? If I'm going to be a coach or I'm going to be a facilitator or a leader, like what are those skills? It's a 6-month program that's partly based outdoors and partly based online, and is around teaching people how to work in groups, teaching people how to work with individuals. We use our own group as the canvas for that, as the practice space. Yeah, it's really fun. That's like a big passion of mine. I mean, I'm a hiker. We've gone on big, long walks around the hills here in San Rafael. And, there's something that just happens when we're outdoors that makes you think differently. You understand yourself as part of something much bigger. You find a place of awe and a place of mystery with earth under your feet instead of just sidewalk. It just helps me integrate everything about my life. So I find it really powerful to take groups out there, and I find people really starved for that, honestly. That sense of being together, being outdoors. We'll probably do some aspect of music because I love music as a teaching tool for bringing people together and practicing some of these skills. And then we'll be training just more grounded sort of coaching, facilitation, mediation kind of skills.
Yeah, can you speak a little bit more about some of the music integration you've done? Like I know you have worked with not Bobby McFerrin directly, but some of his closest proteges.
I have a workshop. I have a workshop coming up with Bobby in 2 weeks. Super excited about that. But one of his bandmates lives here in Oakland in the Bay Area. His name's Dave Worm, and he's played with Bobby in his improv group for the last 20-25 years. Awesome guy. And that's a really, I feel like it's so important to have these practices just outside of what you do that add to what you do. And one of those for me is music. I've always loved music for the way that you have to be both listening externally and listening internally. You have to be attuned to the rhythm or the chord structure that other people are playing. And then you have to be able to listen to what's coming out of you. And so the practice that Bobby's well known for is called circle singing. And it's a form of gathering improvisationally. And the way that he would do it, this is how he created it, was he's a genius. If folks don't know Bobby McFerrin, should definitely check out more than just the Don't Worry, Be Happy. Check out his album called Circle Songs. Maybe Ryan can post that in the notes for people to check out. Amazing album, so creative. He's kind of a master musician who wrote that Don't Worry, Be Happy song a little bit off the cuff as a joke, like in between other songs. But he's a classically trained jazz, pop, like he kind of does it all. But he would perform in front of big groups and improvise different parts of a song. Like he might start with a bass line, and then he would hear the next part of the song. So he would pass the bass line off to the big group of people in the front left of the stage. And he would work with them until they got it. And then he'd introduce the next piece of song to the front right of the stage. And then he'd add another piece of song, a horn section or something, and call out to people in the rafters. So he'd build this live sand mandala of sound that you as an audience member, I've been to a couple of his shows, and it's just like so much joy of like a whole room singing and resonating together under his direction. And so he created this style, circle singing. The way that I integrate that is it can be done really easily in small groups. So with 5 people, with 10 people, with 30 people. And it's a great leadership tool. So the style is someone steps into the center of the circle and listens for a part of a song, listens for a little piece, a little something, a bass line, starts repeating it, and then you pass it off to 2 people. And it's really, you're not saying you two start singing. It's just with your arms. Boom, like you're directing, you and you. Yeah, and you're singing it. Doom, doom, day, doom, 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 day, doom, doom. Until they start building it. And then you move to the next piece of a song. And you move to the next piece. And pretty soon you have this built structure. And it's a great leadership exercise, because if you step in and you're not clear, I don't know if this is a good part, like you're questioning it. When you come up to those 2 or 3 people and you're going to hand it off to them, it's super confusing. They're like, are you giving us the part? Should we keep going now? You know, there's all these questions. Whereas if someone's clear and grounded and just settled in their body, it's like the part takes root. They receive it really easily. They feel your direction. They feel your clarity. And so I do that with groups. We trade off stepping into the center. And this is something that I feel like is really powerful in Enliven or in any space, is if you can get together in an environment that's outside of your family, that's outside of your work, where you can experiment facilitating, experiment mediating a conflict, experiment leading a circle song, and actually get feedback. Hey, here's what I loved about your song, and here's where it felt like I couldn't quite follow you, or I was confused. Yes, there are cultures that can build that, right? Certain organizations where feedback's really woven into the day in, day out thing, but it's so valuable to just step out of time and get that feedback from people who can look at us maybe more clear-eyed. It's not our wife or husband or partner. It's another person on the path who can just say, yeah, here's how it landed for me.
I love that. And it reminds me of something like yoga, where you're not necessarily thinking about yoga helping you with your relationships or in your business or something, but some of the learnings of like, you know, teaching sort of balance or leaning in or like being generous with yourself can teach you a lot about yoga off the mat. It sounds like circle song in a way is like a creative way to get into some of those pieces that we might not normally be able to access in just like a conversation.
Totally. Anything somatic or other practices that we can use as metaphor. I mean, I'm a big fan of yoga, qigong, these things where it's both dynamic and passive. How are we balancing those two in ourselves? And you're right, completely. We have an experience of it. Oh, wow. It's not about me just like forcing myself into down dog. Can I like relax my lower back and legs and ground into the ground? And it actually gives me more space to clarify my arm lines. And then I'm dropping in like, how am I thinking about my marketing or accounting system where I'm just like, I'm going to muscle my way through this versus like, what are the subtle internal things that I might relax such that it frees up more space?
You mentioned one of your other mentors, Diane Hamilton, and I think she works with the integral facilitator certification.
Yeah. She was the lead teacher that program was kind of created around.
Can you introduce folks to Diane and what you've been doing with her?
Sure. Yeah, Diane is awesome. Diane is a badass. She's a Zen priest, so she's a lineage holder in the Soto Zen tradition through Genpo Roshi. She lives in Salt Lake City and has a Zendo down in Torrey, Utah, sort of near like Bryce Canyon, Zion. And she worked as a mediator for many years in the Utah Justice Department and created the like alternative dispute resolution department. She kind of created that over there. She's really well known as a mediator who works in a lot of hot contexts. So like political fights, boardroom fights, a lot of conversations around race, gender, privilege, power dynamics. And because she's a Zen teacher, there's a lot of richness to what she does because it's about, you can do mediation from just a sort of neutral third party kind of perspective, or you can hold mediation from a place of emptiness of self such that you can be a part of the mediation without so much attachment. So she just has a quality of fluidity that is really beautiful. And I've trained with her maybe over the last 6 years or so, doing her program. And then I came back to work with her and I've assisted a couple courses with her. But yeah, she's amazing. 2 Arrow Zen is her organization.
And how do you integrate some of those teachings into how you interact with clients or in some of your client work?
If it's a straight up mediation, there's a very specific process that I've learned from her around taking parties through mediation, which is a great skill if you're a leader of a team, not even if you're like wanting to be a mediator, but just knowing how to navigate conflict. Like when 2 parties disagree or you're in a brainstorming meeting and you're generating options and it's feeling super stuck. There are very specific ways from the world of mediation to unlock some of those. For example, it's kind of like to use another somatic sort of metaphor, it's way easier to dance with someone who's also dancing back with you. And one of the things that we do in group meetings is come to agreement before there's really agreement, or skip over there being disagreement, maybe is a better way to say it. It's starting to get heated, or there's like 2 different ideas. And what we would do with Diane is really part of getting to a resolution is really clarifying the polarity. And sometimes it's really scary on a team to say, no, we should be all together. Like we all are nice people. Why are we disagreeing? Let's not differentiate too much. But we can't really, again, it's like it's sort of that dance where neither party is really dancing. It's not exciting and you can't create something new from that mentality. So allowing the poles to separate, and you're not separating dangerously, but you're separating. You're saying, I really disagree, and here's where I'm standing. Here's what I'm standing for. What are you standing for? Having the other party or the other part of the group like really differentiate and say, boom, this is where we stand. Boom, this is where we stand. And it's like this moment where you have a charge. 2 poles have, boom, I'm putting my stake in the ground right here. This is what I'm standing for. that creates a lot of energy in that movement. Now there's a polarity. Now we can move somewhere. We might be able to just re-clarify whatever we're talking about. We might be able to jump to a next level of something that we've been trying to get to. But if we keep it in this, you start to pull apart in our bodies. We start to get movement of nervousness. We start to, oh my God, what are other people thinking of? Things start to move. And so part of the teaching in that world, again, coming back to the somatics, is being aware of our own body mind. So if I'm working with a leader or anybody in a position, it's one of the skill sets is just being aware of what's happening in your own body. And some of that you're going to bring into conversation. Some of it's just for you to recognize. Okay, if I'm making a stand for something, I'm going to have a movement inside me. Things are going to come up, whether it's fear or anger or sadness. And can I make space for those? Can I hold those and still be in relationship, creating a polarity, and then we can move to something. So it's sort of elements like that where, I didn't really, again, going back to school, nobody taught me about that. You get in an argument with a girlfriend or whatever, or you're on a team doing a project together. It's like, oh, I didn't realize there were sort of these structures and dynamics to conflict itself. And that I could study those in myself. Oh, wow, I'm getting to that point where we're differentiating, and I'm noticing that I'm shutting down right now. Like my creativity is closing. My mental model of the situation is closing, and I'm wanting to turn away. That looks like this old pattern of conflict avoidance that I have. That whatever, my mentor, my instructor has helped me to see. Okay, what happens if I just speak that into the space? Wow, I totally get where you're coming from, but I'm noticing I'm closing down a little bit right now. I notice I'm wanting to, even though this is a really important conversation, like I'm wanting to turn away. I'm wanting to, like part of me is wanting to leave right now. And I just need to say that so I can be more present in the space. Like I'm noticing that happening. And that could be a moment where the other person sort of backs up and says, oh, wow, okay. I could kind of see that happening. I didn't know what was happening, but I could see something happening. So let me just slow down and, okay, let's maybe enter a different tone of how we're navigating something difficult. There's a lot of richness and a lot of subtlety that I've learned from Diane, mainly around it being like safe for there to be strong emotions. We as humans have strong emotions, and we care about our work and we care about each other. And even with all that, we can still disagree quite strongly. And some of that's maybe necessary. So I just feel like going into an era of solving climate crisis and processing collective trauma here in the US, some of these, political polarization, these things that we have on our plate for the next 50 years, probably a lot longer, but I'm just like, the next 50 are crucial. We're going to need those skills. We're going to need to be able to handle our own emotions when they rise up, be able to communicate even in strong emotions without rupturing or throwing relationships out the window. How can we love each other and still be quite strong? What are the containers and skills for doing that?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I'm just reflecting that what you're trying to do is really hard.
Yeah, right.
Not many people want to go into collective trauma or speaking up. Like, I'm feeling tightness in my chest as you're talking to me. Like, there's just no cultural practice for those types of things. And yet, I would agree that to address some of these large challenges, climate crisis, racial justice, there needs to be more engagement and flexibility in engaging with those conversations in a way that's generative.
Right. Totally. Yeah, willingness, and then places we can train it too, like where it is safe. right? Where there's a format, there are instructors, there's a container. Hey, that was too strong. Let's slow down here, right? Like that's one of the things, being in these deep trainings with Diane and Thomas, one of the things with conflict is like it can just move very quickly. It starts, speeds up, and just having that people there who can say, hey, this is moving really fast. Let's take a moment. Let's just slow down. Right. So I think, yeah, you're right. I guess I am interested in these things that are challenging. But, I think like the work that you're up to and the work that probably a lot of people are up to listening is also could say that, right? It's very hard. But like, what else is there to do? This is what we've been training for, and what a gift to kind of bring ourselves and our practices to lean into places where that need support. The times, and maybe, just think about a time or a place where you've been on a team that is just in that place of flow. That's in that place of trust, whether it's a party or a team that you've been a part of, or a camp or family, where there's just that there's like movement, and like you feel alive and other people feel alive. I think that's just what I have my eye on, is like, wow, it could be just that sense of it could be so much better. It could be so fulfilling, really magical. Maybe it's too strong a word, but that's the sense I have in these moments of music, or when a team works through something really heavy. The lightness on the other side of that is like, wow, all right, we needed to digest that.
As we move to the last couple questions, what do you need right now, and how can the listeners help you grow this next economy?
I don't know if I have a clear need sort of specifically for my own business. I mean, if you're interested in training and joining a community of practitioners around practicing some of these skills for working with collectives and working with yourself, check out my website, Enliven Academy. We have a cohort starting next spring, 2022. My work as a one-on-one coach. Always happy to work with purpose-driven leaders and change makers, entrepreneurs. But I would just more offer this less like something I need, but I think maybe what we all need is just to find moments where you can slow down, put your phone down, put the marketing plan down, put the laptop down, and just connect with the people around you. Connect with your partner, your neighbor, your dog, your cat, your plants, and just find that slowness that sort of reminds you of being human, and then move from that place.
Beautiful. Love that. And you mentioned it, but where can folks go to find out more about your work? Like website or social media or anything like that?
Yeah, I would just go to enlivenacademy.com. I mean, you can email me, spencer@enlivenacademy.com, but you'll pretty much be able to find me on there. I'm not a big social media person. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn, but yeah, don't expect too much.
I like it. Well, Spencer, I appreciate it. We've had some of these conversations on long hikes or at the dinner table, but it's great to do it on this medium, and so other folks can listen in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just appreciate you coming on the show. Yeah,
thanks for having me, man. I love what you're up to. Really inspiring, and it's great to be here. See you for dinner.
For sure.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.